Maryland should feel a lot better about themselves after the national championship game.
You are Locked On Terps, your daily podcast on the Maryland Terps. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everyone? I'm Tre Moore, video content creator for 247 Sports and InsideMarylandSports.com, and host of Locked On Terps, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So thank you for making us part of your days. And today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, new potential hires can feel like high-stakes wagers for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs help find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. After watching Michigan win the national championship game, it made me realize Maryland football is a lot closer than what I may have thought in becoming a borderline like top 25 team and just beating one of these top programs. I think Maryland football is a lot closer, and I think Maryland football is a lot better, in a better spot than I thought going into this college football playoff overall. After watching what Michigan did to the rest of the country and seeing the run that they had, after watching Michigan beat Washington 34-14, and they handled Washington relatively easily. I mean, I guess Washington had a couple opportunities to stay in the game, and they just missed that. But overall, Washington just wasn't a match up front to Michigan. And the funny thing was, everyone was talking about how good Washington's offensive line was and all that type of stuff, and how Michigan's defensive line, how they weren't going to be as good as they were against Alabama against Washington offensive line. But no, that's not what happened. Michigan clearly was a better team up front, offensive and defensive line. So they handled Washington really easily. And Michigan went through their entire schedule with only having a couple of real tests. Alabama, of course, in the college football semis, that was one of the best games of the year, maybe the game of the year. Of course, that OT game, really amazing type of game where Corum had the game-winning touchdown overall. And Bama had the fourth quarter lead. You could probably say that was their biggest test of the season. And also Ohio State gave them a challenge at 24-30, came down to the final drive. So you look at their biggest test, two of the biggest brands in the sport, if not the two biggest brands. Alabama and Ohio State gave them their two toughest tests of the season. And then Maryland. Maryland gave Michigan one of their biggest fights of the year, 31-24. You could argue that it was basically the same type of test as the Ohio State game. You could argue that the Maryland game was more of a test. Maybe I wouldn't say that because of all that goes into that rivalry, the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry, and the pressure of that game, and just that game just with, even if the score wasn't close, the amount of pressure of that game brings, I think that you would say that probably the Ohio State game was a bigger test because of their talent overall. But in terms of just how the game was played, the Ohio State game and the Maryland game was pretty similar. Maryland definitely gave Michigan its top three test of the season. And I saw people saying on Twitter they gave Michigan their hardest test of the season. I think that definitely goes to Alabama. But overall, you could definitely argue that Maryland gave Michigan their second biggest fight of the year. If you remember, the score was 31-24. Maryland came back down 16-3. That was the biggest thing. Maryland didn't have like an early lead in the game, and like it was like, oh, okay, Michigan's just going to come back. They came out slow. Michigan came down and played pretty solidly in the first half and went up 16-3. But Maryland dominated Michigan in the second half, creating big plays with Talia down the field, and even had a victory had a third quarter lead in that game. Michigan really had to do a lot to win that game, and they almost sold it to Maryland. We were looking at it. It was right before Ohio State week, so you could say maybe Michigan was distracted and all this stuff, but they almost didn't win that game against Maryland overall. And when I look at the quarterback play, Talia versus Michigan's defense went 21 of 31 for 247 yards and had a couple of huge passing gains, including a 34-yarder to Caden Prather, a 24-yarder to Jase Jones, while Michael Penix Jr., who a lot of people consider maybe the best quarterback in the country, the most natural passer of a real natural thrower of the ball, if you see the way it comes out, even though it wasn't the best against Michigan overall. But if you saw what he did against Texas, that guy could throw the ball, very natural thrower of the ball, lefty, could absolutely let it go overall. Talia actually did a much better job against Michigan's defense. Like I said, Talia went 21 of 31 for 247 yards, while Penix, who could be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, needed 51 throws to get to 255 yards. Yes, there was some missed throws and all that type of stuff, but overall, Talia did a lot of really good stuff against the Michigan's defense overall. So I think in terms of our talent, not just Talia, because of course he's gone next year and all that, but in terms of our talent on the outside and our receivers, I think our receivers are the most underrated part of our team. Everyone within Maryland knows about our receivers overall, but people outside of Maryland don't know how good that wide receiver group was this year. Caden Prather, Jase Jones, and Ty Felton were all so good, and it makes me feel so much better to realize that Maryland was able to throw against Will Johnston, who's one of the best corners in next year's draft, might be a top 5 pick, won defensive MVP, and that pass rush overall. Maryland was able to create plays down the field with that against that Michigan defense. That was scary. Like I said, held Michael Penix to 255 yards on 51 attempts. 51 attempts. If you said Michael Penix had 51 attempts, you would think he would have like 350 yards at least with 51 attempts. So it makes me feel a lot better after watching the national championship game, realizing what Talia was able to do, and then also realizing what our receivers were able to do. And then also our defensive line and our linebackers and our defense overall, I feel a lot better what they were able to do against Michigan. And it's not like this was the only game they did this against the Ohio State game. They also did an amazing job at stopping the run against Michigan. Compared to what other top teams did that Michigan played, Maryland did the best. Against Washington, got gashed in the run game. And I thought that going in, that Washington could get gashed in the run game in that game. And a lot of people thought that Michigan rushed for 303 yards with an average of 8 yards per carry. And I didn't think it was going to be that bad. And then against Bama, they averaged 4.1 yards per carry, which is a very solid number. If you hold Michigan to 4.1 yards per carry, you're probably in a pretty good spot for the game. And I would say Bama was in a pretty good spot in that game. They definitely could have won that game, especially looking back if Jalen Milroe doesn't fumble that football. But back to my main point of Maryland football, Maryland, they only averaged 3.3 yards per carry in the run game against Maryland. So I find that very interesting overall to see that Maryland was able to stop the run better than Bama was, and then also better than Ohio State was. Michigan was able to run the ball a lot of the times on Ohio State as well, and then also better than Washington was, who was the number 2 team in the country at that point. And so after watching the national championship game, I just feel a lot better about Maryland's talent. I know it was just one game overall, but whenever you play the number 1 team in the country, who everyone pretty much basically thinks is the best team in the country, unless you're like kind of on the cheating scandal stuff and you don't think it's deserved or whatever. Basically, everyone thinks this Michigan team is the best team in the country. The committee got the playoffs right, so it wasn't like they were playing a horrible Florida State team, not a horrible Florida State team, but a bad or not as good of a Florida State team without their starting quarterback. They beat Nick Saban, they beat Alabama, and then they beat Washington, and Penix was as hot as anybody in the country. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, wow, I feel a lot better about how Maryland played overall. And people aren't going to view us as a program that's a lot closer. That's the wording I like to say. I think we're a lot closer than people think because we had a couple of bad losses last year to like Illinois, to Northwestern. But if Maryland wins those games that they're supposed to win, I think the country views us a lot differently at this point. especially with the 3 straight bowl games, how we played in the first half against Ohio State, how we played against Michigan, and we almost won that game. And I forgot to bring up, if Talia did some good things in the passing game, made some big-time throws, but if Talia doesn't turn over the ball 3 times, if he turnovers the ball just 1 time, we win that game. So I feel a lot better about Maryland football. I think we're closer, not to being a top team in the country. We're not close to being like a Bama or a Michigan at this point. That's not my point, or a Georgia. My point is we're a lot closer to taking down one of those type of teams that we're going to play every year. We're going to play the USCs. We're going to play Ohio State. We're going to play Michigan. I mean, it's going to switch every year. It's not going to be the same thing every year now, but we're going to play Penn State. I think Maryland's a lot closer now to taking down one of those teams, and I think that's what the national championship really made me realize how close this Maryland team is. I think I view us a little bit differently. I think we're a lot better than I thought we were, honestly, after watching what Michigan did to the number 2 team in the country, after watching them beat Bama, after watching them beat Ohio State. We arguably gave them the second hardest test of the season, which is saying something with the amount of good teams they played and going into the college football playoff. So overall, after watching the national championship game, I took away that Maryland is a lot closer than people think to being a top 25 team a lot of the times, and doing that and be able to be a consistent top 25 team, and then also taking down one of those top programs that we get to play every year in the Big Ten. Should Kevin Willard be on the hot seat? I will tell you about that after this ad from LinkedIn. These days, new potential hires can feel like high-stakes wagers for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs help find the right people for your team faster and for free. A lot of people need jobs right now, and if you want to find someone amazing for your company, LinkedIn Jobs helps find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Should the Maryland head basketball coach, Kevin Willard, be on the hot seat? I'm going to say no. Kevin Willard should not be fired or should not be on the hot seat for Maryland basketball. I know a lot of fans are tweeting out right now that Maryland basketball, that Kevin Willard isn't the coach. He's not the guy. He's not that good of a coach, and that we should have went with someone else, and that Kevin Willard should be fired. I mean, you kind of see that all around in terms of when you think of when a coach isn't performing or a team isn't performing, all the fans in the comment sections are going to be like, fire Coach Willard. But I'm talking about real fans that I talk to that are really into this thing and that have strong opinions and really follow Maryland basketball. A lot of people think that Kevin Willard should be on the hot seat or should be fired for how this season is going so far overall. And I'm just going to say I disagree. I don't think Kevin Willard should be close to be on the hot seat. I don't think he should be fired. I don't think any of that. I think he is fine right now. I don't know how it's going to be in the future, but I think right now Kevin Willard should not be fired, and I think he's doing just fine. I know this season isn't going well overall, but a lot of it isn't on Coach Willard. I just don't think at the end of the day, our team is that good. I hate saying it. I don't want to say those words and just saying that straight up like that. I hate doing it. But I don't think we're that good. And when you're not that good and your team doesn't have a lot going for them, you can't really, coach can only do so much overall to overcome certain things. And I think that's what Coach Willard really has had happen to him. I don't think we have enough elite players. I don't think we have enough of a mix of players overall. My bad. The lights are censored, so they turn off sometimes. But back to the point, I don't think we have a good enough mix. I don't think we have enough depth. And I just don't think this team is that good right now. And you see it at all levels. When a team is going through a rebuild, like in the NFL, first-year coaches don't typically get fired. Or in the NBA, if a team is going through a rebuild, first-year coaches don't typically get fired, or second-year coaches don't usually get fired. I mean, it happens when absolute disaster has struck. And I know I said disaster has struck Maryland basketball, but it's really not as bad as I think it is, or I think what a lot of people perceive it to be. I don't think a lot of this is his fault. I don't think there's much you can do with this team in terms of drawing up different plays and doing different things and making the offense flow. At the end of the day, you have to have some sort of offensive talent to be able to do that. And we do. We have some for sure. And Coach Willard, don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to make excuses for him. He should have done a much better job this year. But I do think that a lot of it is that this team just isn't as good as we thought it would be overall. And yes, part of that is his fault. He's supposed to build the roster overall. He's supposed to recruit along with the rest of the staff. But if we're being honest with ourselves, we thought this 2023 class was going to be one of the better Maryland classes we have had in a while, honestly. We thought this 2023 class could do some big things. It was a top 25 class. He brought in guys we were excited about, and the rest of the country was exciting about, and recruiting websites had ranked high. And Deshaun Harris-Smith, of course, borderline was a 5-star, really high 4-star. A lot of people said he could have been a 4-star. Mr. Basketball in Virginia and a top player in the class. Jamie Kaiser was a 4-star, and Jonathan Lamoth was a 4-star on some websites. It was a top 25 class overall. He brought in the transfer Jordan Geronimo from Indiana, and overall, okay, maybe we wanted Hunter Dickinson, and maybe we wanted more in the portal, but we did have Jameer Young and Julian Reese coming back, and Dante Scott coming back. So we expected this team to be a lot better. But I think when you look at it, this team just isn't offensively talented enough. We don't shoot the ball well enough at all. And to be honest, there's been a lot of open looks. And he can do a lot of things. He could help with your shooting form and like whatever. And the rest of the staff does a lot of that too, the skill stuff. But at the end of the day, like, a lot of the shooting stuff is going to come down to how much those guys work on it, how natural they are as shooters. I always have that belief that some guys just aren't going to be as natural shooters as other guys. Like, even if LeBron practices the amount of threes that Steph Curry practices, it won't matter, just because Steph Curry is one of the best shooters of all time, of course, but he's just one of the most natural shooters of all time. Some people are just born with that overall, and that's no slight to LeBron, obviously, but that's just what I'm saying. I think guys like Deshaun Harris-Smith isn't quite a natural shooter, and it takes a lot of work for him to get to be just an okay shooter. Overall, I know he works on it a ton, and the shot's still not falling. So overall, I think this team just isn't. It's just not a very good team overall. So I don't blame it on Kevin Willard. I do think he could have done a lot of better stuff, but we have to remember he did do a lot of good things in the past. Last year, in this first year, we made it to March Madness. We did awesome at home last year. We beat one of the top teams in the country in Purdue. I mean, the main thing is we made it to March last year in his first year, in a year where the expectations were on the lower side on a team that wasn't viewed the same as this year's team. And obviously, you want your coach to stack up years on years on years in terms of that's what elite coaches do. They don't just like have 1 year on and 1 year off. But it takes a while to build this stuff. It takes a while to build all the Lego pieces into that really cool Lego set that you see. It takes a while for coaches to be able to build something and be able to build consistency. And it takes a little bit of time. You can't just give up on someone right away before they get in a couple of years, I think, especially. Some things are just so bad, and you look at, he's got to be gone right away because it's just that bad. But this isn't one of those situations. We're in the bottom of the Big Ten right now, and we're 9-6, and we're not the best right now. But overall, I do think a lot of it is on Kevin Willard, but I don't think he should be on the hot seat. I don't think this team is that good overall. I think we're way too Jameer Young dependent. I think Julian Reese has turned off the aggressiveness in some games, and I don't think a lot of it's on Kevin Willard. We'll see how the rest of the year goes. We'll see overall how it finishes up, but I don't think Kevin Willard should be on the hot seat. Like, last year was such a good year. We can't just forget that. We overcame a lot last year, and I know we expected expected this year to be the same, but I don't think we can just put him down and say he's a bad coach now because of how this year has gone. We got to give him a little bit. I think he's not going to get fired, but I think he deserves at least another year or two to turn it around after this off year, and he could turn it around this year. We'll see what happens, but I do think he's done some good things in recruiting, and I do think he's done a pretty solid job overall. A Maryland player is projected to go day 2 and high in the NFL draft. I will tell you about that and how high I think he should go after this ad from FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find a bet in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, the official partner of the NFL. Beau Brade has a chance to go really high in the NFL draft, and I think he should go high in the NFL draft. I've been reading a lot about the NFL draft and everything. I mean, not just about Maryland players. I like reading about other guys too and see what's going on. But I found a couple things that I was reading about Beau Brade, and it shows that he could go really high in the draft. Beau is arguably our best defensive player. He's been a starter for a while now. Absolutely got snubbed off at least third team All Big Ten. He was honorable mention, but he should have been at least third team. I didn't really understand it. He made a ton of plays for this team, and he was definitely one of the better safeties in the Big Ten. And I think he's really gone underrated in terms of how the Big Ten coaches view him. I guess votes on the who is all Big Ten, and then also the media gets like a vote. I think he's gone underrated in terms of those two categories. But I don't think NFL scouts will underrate him. I think everything he does, his game overall, is really suited for the NFL. And I think the NFL is going to love him, and I think he's going to have a chance of going high in the draft. Pro Football Network, who does a lot of this scouting stuff and gives you all these reports on these guys and scouting stuff on them, and you can read a whole report on them, says he has a ton of strengths. Says his strengths are playmaking, feel for the ball, quick downhill trigger on click and close, fluid given his sturdy frame. He's definitely sturdy. He's a sturdy guy. Like, you're not going to just run through him, but he's also really fluid. I thought that was a really good point to make because I noticed that, but I didn't know exactly how I wanted to word it with Beau Brade. But they seem to be really high. You can read more about that on their network, which all makes sense to me. I think he's perfect for the NFL game because of his versatility. He can play up in the box. He can play a deep half. He can do everything you want. He can play zone. He can play man. He can match up against a tight end. That's another strength that they said he does well. And he's a big guy too. He can hit too. He's so versatile. I think he's perfect for the NFL game. And Pro Football Network said they think he'll go on day 2, which is pretty big time, a day 2 safeties. Safeties don't go in the first round. I don't know if any safety will go in the first round in this year's draft. I don't know if I've seen a safety get mocked in the first round. So if he's in a day 2 pick, second, third round guy, which I think, I mean, I'm biased obviously, but I think that's around where Brade should go in his draft status. I think he should be around a second, third round pick. I think he's that good. But him being a day 2 safety means that he's one of the top safeties in the draft, and I agree with that. We'll see how well he tests in the combine and how well he plays in the Senior Bowl. Of course, he's a Senior Bowl invite. If he plays well in the Senior Bowl, I think he upgrades his draft status and declares himself as a second, third round type of guy, day 2 type of guy. But if he doesn't, he could slip to maybe 5th, 6th round. We'll see how he plays. I totally expect him to prepare well, be ready physically to go for that type of stuff. And then I guess he'll be in the combine too. It depends on a lot of this depends on how well you test. A lot of NFL teams are really into that type of stuff, but of course you got to put it on film as well. But I agree with the second, third round pick from Pro Football Network, and I think he could be a day 2 type of guy, which will be huge for Maryland because continuing to put out guys in the secondary in the NFL draft and high in the NFL draft, whether it's Shaquille Bennett, whether it's Deontay Banks in the first round, whether it's Beau Brade going in the second, third round, whether it's Cross, whoever it is, these Maryland secondary guys, Maryland is turning these guys into high round picks. If they continue to do that, I think we're in a good spot to be able to recruit that position. And we have done a really good job at recruiting that position overall. That's all we have for today. Thank you for listening to Locked on Terps. Make sure you like and subscribe. We're here every day talking Maryland football and basketball. So thank you for listening to Locked on Terps.